So I finally read through all 407 pages of H.R.1, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009. It's kind of embarrassing, but this is the first act I've ever actually read. Although in retrospect, after having gone through the whole thing, I'd have to say that I don't feel like I was really missing anything all those years. I think the important thing to take away from reading one of these bills is that it's not so much the content as the structure of the document itself that kind of just makes you wonder how our bureaucracy even manages to function. I mean, the only way to really describe how these bills are composed is to say that they are written like machine language, like code for some kind of computerized system to decipher and implement. There are so many references to other acts and amendments to other acts encapsulated in an unbelievable number of sections and subsections, that in reality what you have here is not really an act at all, but a network that encompasses a huge segment of legal and political resources. As I understand it, the method by which these bills are composed is basically that there are lots and lots of constituents who then communicate their desires to the legislators or members of Congress and the Senate, and then these particular individuals create sort of pet projects that are representations of what those constituents would like to see in the bill. And then somebody brings all of those small documents together. You know, there may be hundreds or even thousands of them when they're collating everything. And then all of those are somehow using black magic and probably human sacrifice combined into a travesty of a document like this that is pretty much unintelligible, with hundreds, if not thousands, of references and citations and amendments to other acts and other bills. So basically what you're looking at is not a 400-page bill at all, but, you know, a 1,000,000-page bill that contains all sorts of reference sections from thousands of other bills. Ultimately what you have is something that's completely incomprehensible, and not just to the average person who may be reading this, but even to lawyers and people who are trained to read these kind of documents. I mean, I really cannot see how this is functional in any way. It is completely dysfunctional. I'm just reading through it again. It's ridiculous. What's really embarrassing is how pleased and happy they all look with themselves, patting each other on the back and smiling and having their little press conference. And after they've all basically jumped on board this incomprehensible bill that not even one of them really has any understanding of what's going on inside it. I'm willing to bet that even if you had an entire month to go through this line by line and actually write out all the references to every one of these bills and their ancillary references that would also be necessary, you would probably still, even after a month, have only a vague idea of exactly what this legislation was trying to enact in its entirety. Now, obviously, there are certain groups that are just going to be analyzing and extracting the sections that are only relevant to their interest. But that's not really practical, is it, for an entire bill? In which case, the entire legislation is actually flawed because it isn't just the relevant sections to each subgroup. It's an entire policy that affects all of the various administrations and elements that are involved. Now, $111 billion of this is allocated to various infrastructure and science projects. Although, I think that's kind of laughable considering that the infrastructure of these bills is so horribly malformed that it's miraculous that anything ever gets done. Obviously, the most conspicuous problem is that depending on your interpretation of all these sections, the bill can be misread in such a way or misinterpreted that it can pretty much allow for almost anything. There are so many sections in here that basically amount to a blank check that just allow certain departments to write off expenses or cite them under blanket categories. Like they have one in here that is used repeatedly over and over again. It's just the word science in quotes. Which means what? It's completely non-specific. Anyway, I'm embarrassed and astounded at how our political system works. This is a disaster. I mean, even if this bill affects the results that were originally intended by the dozens, if not hundreds of authors, it's still going to be a failure. And you want to know why? Because no one's in control of this thing. No one is in control. I mean, this is just unbelievable that our political system has degenerated into this kind of undirected chaos. It's unacceptable.